I'm really excited about this interview because I feel passionate about the subject, electronics. I don't hate electronics like most people think. For example, the people who are riding on the street and track days, it keeps them safer. You know, they can go to work on Monday morning and go fast on the track day on Sunday. The reason I feel passionate about electronics in our sport is that what it does. For example, in my day, there's riders that, I was one of them, I saw Carl Fogarty do it as well, like win a race on a bike, for example, that Carl Fogarty's father bought for him, you know, and he won a World Superbike race at Donington against the factory riders, you know. And the way I see it, riders only have so many opportunities to show what they can do. You know, they'll have one of those days and stand out and everyone will go, wow, that was impressive. And I think too often today, riders further back on the grid will have one of those days and you don't even notice them because they don't have the same electronic package as the boys at the front. And I've felt like this for a while, and I've only spoken out loud about it, but the man I'm sitting with here right now has actually done something about it. And that's why I'm so excited. Stuart Higgs.
Hi, sir.
Stuart, I wanted to talk to you. I'm excited about it because you took the leap, you know, and changed the championship you run, you know, to no electronics, and I wanted to hear your reasons for doing that.
Pretty much everything that you've said in your introduction there. I mean, back in 2008, we genuinely felt that Superbike as a motorbike racing discipline was in serious trouble. There was only an elite bunch of teams that could afford the hardware, and an elite bunch of teams also that could hire the expertise to operate such hardware, and that then created a very limited group of people that could ride to the benefit of that electronic assistance, and it made a very disparate field. You had the haves and the have-nots, and our sport at the end of the day is entertainment. We are in the entertainment business, and we've got to put a show on where as many people as possible have got the ability to win, and it can't be just so elite that it's down to the best rider who's just fortunate enough to have the best budget. So we saw the technical rules getting out of control, budgets getting out of control. We were fortunate in the championship, joined forces with a guy called Jonathan Palmer, who was an ex-Formula 1 driver, and in car racing they'd pretty much done the cycle that we find ourselves in now. Formula 1 in particular had got to the situation of active suspension and full driver aids and driver assistance, where, you know, quite openly people were saying a trained monkey could be a Formula 1 world champion, which is probably a little bit harsh, but they realised they didn't need it, and it was like, well, if even F1 doesn't need traction control. And then we had all the arguments, racing improves the breed, it's all about, what you develop in racing goes onto the street product. And we actually looked at people straight in the eye and said that's bullshit, because the traction control and much of the electronics on a racing bike is simply there to make you go faster. It makes you take a corner to the absolute limit of adhesion, and it's all electronics doing the calculations for power v grip. Well, we think, and we will prove right, that power has to be taken back and must solely be in the hand of the rider, and more specifically the right hand of the rider. It's a more honest way of making the championship get presented. Risks get reward.
That's what I was going to say. What do you think on the safety side?
Well, that was the immediate thing that was first thrown at us. Oh, it's going to be absolute carnage, and you're going to have some big shoulders to take that. But conversely, a badly set up bike with full electronics is frankly as lethal as anything out there. And we found, from a safety calculation point of view, accidents were beginning to happen in really odd places, particularly on the exit of corners, where if you take a typically set up racetrack where you're preempting crash zones by making the runoff and protection in certain places, we were finding that the corner speed was getting higher and higher and higher, and when it was going wrong later and later, which was actually very much at the end of where we predict a normal safety zone to be.
Where a rider wouldn't normally crash.
We were beginning to get contact with barriers in places we'd never seen them in before. So for sure, yes, there is the ability where the limit of adhesion gets compromised and people crash, but there is absolutely no evidence in the years since we cut over fully in 2012 to zero traction control, for example, that the accident rate went up. What we did find is that certainly in the mixed weather condition races, and this was this venue we're here at Alton Park, it was the second round of the championship, as I remember, in 2012. It was a wet day, drying, and we had this half and half conditions. And if ever there was a time to prove the theory right or wrong, it was going to be that. And we saw Chris Walker, an old school superbike rider, win a race. And the team that he was in at the time was a privateer team. And in any other season preceding that, he wouldn't have stood a chance, because the others would have been away on full electronics.
Which is what I'm talking about, yeah.
Riders that you would have gone, okay, it's a good result, but and riders in the previous seasons who had almost flattered themselves, you saw them certainly a bit up against it, and the noise coming from certain riders was something had been taken away from them. And I think it's quite odd. We've got now a very indicative year in 2016 where the reigning British champion Josh Brooks has gone to the World Superbike Championship, and his principal troubles have been adaptation and electronics, and they're spending so much time in the garage trying to fix electronics out. And yet we've had Leon Haslam come back from the World Championship to the British Superbike Championship and actually have a smile on his face. And I remember the first test he did, he said, "Wow, I've just remembered what it's like to ride a motorcycle 1-to-1."
Yeah.
And I think...
And win. He won last weekend, yeah.
And I think that, for me, sums it up that we're now in 2016. We did the full cutover to the new electronics package, or the control ECU package, in 2012, and it's still relevant. And we did the initial 5-year rules package, and collectively, teams, riders, and ourselves said, "Hey, it's not broken, so there's nothing to fix. Let's keep it going."
So budget-wise for the teams, I think that's another big argument. In black and white, how do you see it? Is it just as bad now, even without traction control, or electronics?
I think I can only speak by the reality of what I've got here at Alton Park. It's the 9th round of the championship. We have got a grid of over 30 riders on the grid, and the teams are happy. And we've got a range from first through to P11 that can be eligible to win the championship. We have a slightly different point scoring system, controversial as it is. People still talk about it, which is again half the point. But again, it shows that to have 11 people within mathematical range, assisted by the point system, that can win the British Superbike Championship, and on any given weekend, probably up to 15 people can be certainly in line for a podium. Great depth of field and privateer teams, and this is what it's all about. Other championships are in a position where it is budget driven, and you kind of know before the start of the weekend how it's all going to pan out in terms of factory level of equipment and the riders that will be occupying the top spots. You don't get that in this championship, and whilst that optimism and competitiveness exists, the grids remain healthy. And again, we have to roll that back to having a very simple rules package. We've had, you mentioned, Carl Fogarty's dad building him a bike. We've got a similar situation. A rider left the team because he couldn't gel with the bike he was on. So him and his dad have got together with another team, and they've rolled out a British Superbike spec bike. And the guy was posting top 10 times the first time he was out, because in terms of electronics, they just call us up. They get a Motec ECU with a dash, 3,000 GBP. That's it. Yep, harness to put on there, but that's the basic electronic system.
Yeah, brilliant. Two things I wanted to point out. First, that when riders like Leon come back to your championship, people will be forgiven out there for thinking they're going, okay, World Championship back to BSB. But I've done it firsthand, and BSB, the guys know their own tracks so well here. I was stunned how fast the guys are. To me, it's like riding World Championship. When you arrive here, it's not like slipping back to a national championship and the lower level World Championship boys will win. Yeah. No chance. The top boys here, super fast. The next question I had for you is again related on championship. Something I feel passionate about again is Superbikes. Back when I rode it, we had so many wildcard entries. It was beautiful. Like, for example, you'd go to Japan and get your butt kicked by locals there. Same in the US. We'd struggle to get on the podium because there'd be a couple of good US guys. Same in Australia. Same in the UK, it would happen. And when we were riding in Europe, for example, Yamaha or Honda Germany, Yamaha Honda France, Suzuki France, they would turn up to World Superbike rounds, and because I believe, because of the rules of that class, World Superbikes now, how open, how expensive it is, I believe, that's why we don't see them. And crowds, local crowds at those racetracks in those countries have no locals to root for. And I think it's so sad. What do you think? There should be a flat, what do you call it? An international
unification. I mean, it's been talked about many times, and mechanically, oddly enough, the British and World Championships aren't hugely apart. It does come back down to electronics principally as being the main difference. And I think it's the one nettle that it is almost possible to solve. I think for the factory involvement in the World Superbike Championship, the factories will retain the electronic capability because that is important to them, and it is probably more political. Because we don't have those political constraints, we have the freedom of regulatory choice. So I think also, I like you, remember the heady days of World Superbike, Brands Hatch, 100,000 people. They were incredible events, and the whole Brits v the World thing in the case of the British rounds of the World Championship was an incredibly good selling point. Similarly, the Laguna Seca round, the Japanese round, as you say. I think that's the downside of BSB elevating its profile, is because it is talked about in the same context as the World Championship. Everyone kind of talks about it together rather than being a big step up. And now that's no disrespect to the World Superbike Championship either, because that is, I think it's restored a lot of its prestige. It's gone through some difficult times with the previous promoter. Dorna have taken some time to sort of take stock of it, try and define its new character. I think going forward with the calibre of rider they're going to have in 2017, with Bradle moving into the championship, Eugene Laverty comes back, Nicky Hayden will be consolidated in there together with the existing cast. I think it's a good show. They've tried to radicalise it with the format, one race Saturday, one race Sunday. So I think it's work in progress, but I think you're absolutely right. The icing on the cake would be to go back to what its real distinction was, that it wasn't the same 20 guys every weekend, that it was the permanent cast plus the wild cards. So, I don't think that it's a million miles away in terms of the performance, so maybe it's something that we can work on for the future, and I think the sport it would certainly help the product of Superbike, because I think it is different to MotoGP, obviously, and it needs to just define its character a little better and restore it to what it was.
I've got another question that a lot of people wonder about, is pros and cons of one make tyre in a series. What do you think? I've got some thoughts on it, and there's always pros and cons, but I'd love to hear your take on it.
Again, it's a bit like the electronics argument. Tyres became extremely unequal back in the British Superbike Championship in the mid-2000s. So we had a couple of teams on factory Dunlop contracts, development contracts, and then we had HRC running a team with Chianari and Rutter at the time on Michelin's, and the Michelin truck would arrive, and it was an articulated lorry just for one team with Clermont Ferrand's finest. And we found really quirky tracks like Knockhill in Scotland. Michelin will be taking sort of scrapes of the asphalt, getting the data back to Clermont Ferrand, and a little man to turn up in his Renault Clio with a boot full of tyres for the Saturday, based on information they got from the day before. Great for them, and we found obviously they got the formula absolutely spot on. They cleaned up with race results, and similarly with Dunlop, we had a couple of teams, Airwaves Ducati I think it was at the time, and maybe Rizla Suzuki on the best Dunlops, and everybody else was on a different model of tyre. I think it was the D208s, I seem to remember, was the brand or the model at the time. And we had this infamous thing called the Dunlop pecking order, and I would go to the Dunlop race manager and go, okay, well, what's the result going to be this weekend? And what do you mean? And he said, well, I said, tell me what product. I go, okay, well, I don't know, if betting in sport had been proliferated then, you could have cleaned up because you'd have known the result. And then suddenly a rider was injured, I think one of the Honda riders, and Steve Plater was put on to up the Dunlop pecking order, and he bagged his first podium of the year, and he'd never been close all year round. So we tried to solve the problem intelligently by getting all the manufacturers in the room saying, look, you must supply each a percentage of the grid with the same product. If you don't, then we're going to go control tyre, because this was a couple of years after World Superbikes went to Pirelli, and everyone thought they'd be mad. Well, actually, they were the forerunner, and obviously before that, in most car racing championships at the time, they'd already gone down that route. So there are also some commercial benefits as a promoter. It's a bit of a lazy way to get some rights fees by making an official supplier, but that is the business of sport. It is one of the key consumable products, and you can, if you're running a championship, and certainly a lot of the junior championships, it's one of the only ways they can actually put some commercialisation into their series. So that's a consideration. But we were very strict when we went out to tender that there had to be absolutely the most tightest contract possible on equality of supply, the quality of equipment, all the technical side of things, and basically by using extremely high financial penalties and insurance policies that they had to provide, that if anything went wrong in terms of supply of material or any other thing that would risk the show because you're putting all your eggs in one basket, then there will be severe financial penalties, and that's the only way you can commercially control it. And
so you're saying if they supplied better tyres to one rider and another,
yeah,
for example,
absolutely. I mean, that can't happen. There's
penalised,
extremely high control processes in the manufacturing, the batch where they are made in terms of material, batches, storage, and I would say there's been the odd isolated thing that would happen anywhere that's maybe some human error involved down the line in terms of someone gets a tyre was put on a rim the wrong way round. Well, I could argue that's as much the team receiving it should be doing their diligence as well. But that's taking it down to too much of a drilled level. But overall, certainly in World Superbikes, I think Pirelli at Monza had a shocker. We've never had that situation. We've got one really quirky track, Thruxton. I don't know if you remember it. It is it's faster. It's faster than any World Championship track in terms of average speed for a race and average speed for a lap. Really weird, and there's multiple lines, and it just destroys tyres. So that was again an early indicator. If we can master that particular track, we can frankly master anything. So we researched it. We have at that track we have an emergency compound that everyone can be put on if it was deemed necessary. But other championships, they have suffered. I mean, we've seen in MotoGP, I think it was Argentina this year with Michelin, where they had to do a compulsory flag-to-flag bike change, and Phillip Island in the Bridgestone era. I mean, we've never had anything like that. So there are pros and cons. In an ideal world, there would be all the manufacturers investing in teams, helping teams, because it's a good way to showcase product. And if there was enough to go around, it would be great, but I think the reality is there isn't, and therefore from a championship point of view you're able to guarantee a certain type of material. It is the level playing field again. No one can say I lost a race or won a race just because of the tyre, and I think it's something we're going to be stuck with for the foreseeable future.
And Stuart, I've got another question for you. How hard I've seen it is for riders now to get paid, or even before that, get a ride, how they have to bring money. For example, I managed to get, I was stubborn, but I managed to get from New Zealand to winning a Grand Prix, and I didn't put my own money in, after I'd left my country. And I think a lot of the riders in my era managed to do that by just chipping away, getting from one team to the other, working their way up. And I feel really sad now how the young guys having to go and be sponsor chasers literally to find money to ride, and most riders, as you know, are not good at that, so I find it really tough. What is it that's causing this? What do you believe, because I see the crowds are still good, there's still teams in the paddock, like you said, 30 on the grid. What is missing? What do you think?
I mean, it's an extremely complex subject, and it's very easy to point the finger at a promoter like ourselves and say, hey, you're taking all the money, why are you not redistributing it? No. But it's not as simple as that. I mean, certainly at World Championship level, we're seeing, I would argue, probably most the Moto3 riders are probably having to bring budget to the team, certainly say Moto2 and maybe even MotoGP. If you transfer to four wheels, there's a guy being talked about who's going to go into the Williams Formula 1 team that's bringing $30 million with him, and that guarantees him a drive. We've got other drivers in Formula 1 that they're literally state sponsored. I think the government of Venezuela were backing Maldonado and people like that. So that model has been around for years, and certainly prevalent in car racing, where simply a driver goes to a team with a chunk of budget and it's a simple transaction. team owners in motorbike racing, I think, have caught on to this. I mean, there's team owners like, for instance, Simon Buckmaster in the World Supersport Championship, who makes no secret of it. He says, I'm in business. The model is you find the budget to put into the team. The team has some budget of its own, and that's how it's going to be. So, rightly or wrongly, that is the model that has evolved. I've tried to resist it as much as we can here. Yeah, there are people putting budget into certainly most of the support classes, but it's kind of defining what is the professional era or the professional element of racing, and what is for others national championship racing. It is sport is their pastime, and if they were on a national golf tour or a national tennis tour and they hadn't quite made it into the pro rankings, you have to fund yourself to do it. I think our role is to try and keep the costs of participation as low as possible, and to sort of like check that there's not too many sharks out there that are certainly asking for budget that way exceeds the real cost of going racing. But we've got some, in particular the junior levels, and we've been very active in the last couple of years making junior championships for our KTM series and Honda Moto 3 Standard, where you can literally run you buy the bike and can run the bike all within a £20,000 budget. Now, for a season of full-blown televised national championship motorsport under that's unsurpassed. Then I think the bigger picture for some of the bigger riders, I mean, yes, there used to be a very sort of, people say it's prize money, where's all that gone? I mean, there was a period in the championship where teams were being paid a direct sum of money by the promoter and riders, and it didn't make a scrap of difference to the quality and the quantity of the grid. Teams would come and go, and you felt, if you gave a team a chunk of money, they'd disappear at the end of the year. You're thinking, well, what have we got to show for it? So we've tried to be a bit more intelligent with it and work with the teams to help them in sponsorship procurement, because that whole model has changed indescribably. We've come from the era of basically some money changes hands in return for some branding and a few tickets, and that was the basic model of sponsorship. Now it's partnership rather than sponsorship. Mm-hmm. Sponsorship's a bit of a dirty word. It is about a partnership and marketing agreement where a brand or a company invests in a platform, and it's media marketing, it's branding, it's activation, it's product, it's social media. The whole space is changing, and everything is evaluated. For example, a trackside billboard behind me will be timed by an outside monitoring agency and then calculated what TV station it was on, what the number of viewers were, to create a value. So when we sell the sponsorship, we can say sell for X, return for Y, and so there has to be a justification. Now, most of the teams up until probably 3 or 4 years ago wouldn't have known where to start, and we've done some successful examples of having team sponsorships and championship sponsorships and working together, doing all the pitches, doing all the monitoring, and it's an extremely time-consuming process. We've got deals coming to fruition now that the first contact was made 3 to 4 years ago. We've got new introductions that we're starting today that we know probably when the cycle of the conversation and the negotiation comes, it won't be another 2 or 3 years down the line. But once we've locked them in, what we do find is we've got pretty long-term retention, and so therefore the team's got security, their costs of participation are contained, they can pay a rider a salary, and I feel that's a better way of the championship using its assets. We invest in the TV production and in creating the signal that goes worldwide. So we're operating a bit like the English Premiership Football League. So we've got a small geography of operation, but wide global distribution. So we're able to say, invest in the British Superbike Championship, teams, riders, whatever, and your profile and your brand can be globally seen, and we can probably undercut because we're operating at a lower level in terms of cost than other opportunities are out there. So it's a pretty complex subject, and you can when I get known out on Twitter, you can never give that answer in 140 characters. No. But similarly, it's a very different era.
So how would a rider typically work his way up now? Like briefly, how?
I mean, there's entry level classes now. I mean, no, we can now take the ladder back down to being an 8 or a 9-year-old racing in series that are now partnered with BSB, like mini motos and things like that. We've got a project running with a group called Fab Racing. And so that's something that's self-contained on junior tracks. And then the breakthrough classes will be our Honda Moto 3 standard class and our KTM series for 13 and 14-year-olds. And then they're in this paddock. And once they're in this paddock, they can network. And it's yes, as you go up the ladder of classes, the budget increases. But if you're in this environment, you're getting known and you're able to touch the commercial side. You know, it's a lot of people networking. So it's a good environment to be in. But I would touch upon the other point in terms of the whole economics of racing is that there's an era of riders, say in the 70s and early 80s, they live in some very nice houses, as they raced in one of the riskiest periods. And,
yes.
you know, if you got through a season, you've generally lost a couple of good mates. Yeah. You walk with a limp now, and if you've got a nice house and a nice lifestyle, you thoroughly deserve it. But the whole model of racing, there's pictures, you'll see them in the cafe here at Alton Park from the transatlantic races of, say, the late 70s. 40,000 people here. I guarantee everyone who paid that day paid cash. There were no such things as walking through an admission gate having to put a credit card transaction. So there'd be a big pile of cash sitting in the circuit office. The deals were done. You know, it was a very unaudited process. But the costs of running the event in those days, Simon, were nowhere near that they are today. I mean, I think the medical service probably for the 77 transatlantic race here would have been 2 ambulances, and the local doctor, who was probably best friends with the chairman of the organising club, would be the doctor for the day. You know, it was very rudimentary. You know, the safety facilities were, you know, do a deal with the local farmer and put a few straw bales up. Whereas now, in terms of the medical service, you know, we've got like 25 doctors and paramedics, medical helicopters, 6 ambulances, a medical centre that is as well equipped as a local trauma hospital. 1,000 metres of air fence that has to be transported around
the reason I brought this up.
The same number of people are still watching. Yeah. The price hasn't gone up that much in terms of proportionate amounts. Everything's audited, so you can't just give Barry Sheen 40 grand in an envelope, get your 40,000 people turn up, and everyone.
The reason I wanted to bring the subject up is I remember in 1996 when I signed to ride for Kawasaki Factory, and I was travelling. And I met some car racing guys from high level car races, and they couldn't believe that I was from New Zealand and I rode for a factory, an official team, and I didn't pay for it. And I was so proud of my sport, you know, that I said to them, our sport goes on talent, not money, you know, and it did. And that is the bit that I think that has swung, you know. And part of the other thing I've noticed that's changed so much is, to be fair, it supports what you're saying. Is I would sell in '99. Arrow sold 10,000 of my replicas in '99. You know, 10,000 helmets. So they gave me a few bucks for each helmet, and that's like, for example, there's money coming on that. I don't think the helmet sales and sports bike sales are there. I think, so there isn't the support for the riders.
If you look at the helmet thing in particular, one of the things that's killed it is when the cigarette money disappeared, it hasn't really been replaced by anything. There's been a bit into alcohol, but in some countries that stopped. It's all gone to energy drinks. Every Red Bull athlete and every Monster athlete has to have the same damn helmet design. Yeah. So from the replica, and drives the helmet people mad because everyone's helmet's the same. So it solved one problem and created another one. Yeah. But it's a big challenge for the sport. What the cigarette money has never really been replaced. Yeah. And that at World Championship level really did underpin it. I mean, you didn't have to work that hard to do a deal with a cigarette brand. It was just the perfect fit in terms of the demographic, and it just funded everything. And the day that stopped, everyone has had to kind of work for it. And in MotoGP, I mean, I read now the entire championship is essentially, in terms of the teams, they receive huge payments, probably rightly so, because the promoter is to guarantee the product. So it pays the teams literally to be there. Yeah. They are now, their model to get more money into their championship is through pay TV stations. The flip side is, by its very nature, the volume goes down, so it makes it probably less attractive for other sponsors.
Less people see it. Yeah.
I think there's just every way you turn at the moment, there's a solution to something that creates another problem. So
Stuart, that's brilliant. Talk about this. I really appreciate. I've got one more question for you, just to finish on a lighter subject that I would like your take on. Is what makes, from your point of view, what makes a successful rider? The ingredients.
I think you just have to it's an all-round package of obviously talent, attitude, determination. I think just from networking, you got to be super intelligent and just mega talented, and it's an evolving world. Being just good enough in talent isn't enough anymore, which is tragic. But everything is under scrutiny, so you need to know how to adapt to that. And I think that's about it, really. I'm not looking for
brilliant.
something that's a bit more
I know it's a
exciting,
difficult
but
question, but I wanted to hear it from a promoter.
Everything you are, Simon.
Now, I wasn't when I was younger. Stuart, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.